Tri-City Valley Cats. We have wonderful things going on here in the city along our waterfront. We have $125,000 in park improvements going on. We have murals being replaced all along the bridges and new park improvements, playgrounds, and we're creating a ribbon of park space all along the Hudson River from here to the north end of the city. So this is just one phase of a huge project along the riverfront. But this is probably the most notable. I want to thank our politicians that are here, John T. Francisco, our Common Council President, Jim Casey, Brian Leahy, next to me, Mike Stammel, Senator Breslin, Steve Mann from Chuck Schumer's office, Eric Endres, Jim Van Vorst, and Chief Frankowski. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for making this a great event. And our Principal Superintendent Joe Kardash is here. So with that, I'd like to introduce Senator Neil Bresman to say a couple words.
Very quickly, it's great to be here to celebrate baseball in Rensselaer. People don't know the history and how many Hall of Famers came from Rensselaer and how many NBA, the early NBA, had a team in Troy. So Rensselaer County has done a lot for pro sports. But in 138 years ago, in this area, a Grand Slam walk-off home run. Congratulations to everyone in Rensselaer. You should be extremely proud.
I'd like to welcome Mayor Rich Mooney, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the great city of Rensselaer. I just want to thank Councilperson Leahy. He led the charge on this. He's going to speak about the history. He knows this. It's Brian, thank you. To all elected officials, thank you for being here. It's a great day for the city of Rensselaer. Thank you to Matt Millett and John Thorne for helping Brian in his research to find this project, the first Grand Slam in the city of Rensselaer. When Brian approached myself and the rest of the city council about this project, we told him to take the ball and run with it. And Brian and I worked very closely on this, even though Brian Leahy is a big, stark New York Yankee fan, and I am a diehard Boston Red Sox fan, and we put our differences aside to do what's best for the city of Rensselaer. So Brian, thank you. Thank everybody for being here. Thank all our city officials, our DPW for setting this up, and just thank you all for coming to the city of Rensselaer. Brian, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, just as the Mayor said, I'd like to introduce Brian Leahy, the 3rd Ward Alderman and the coordinator of this great event.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, everybody. Like the Mayor said, I read this article, we all probably did, back in February. Paul Grandal had written it, and I know Paul's here somewhere. Hi, Paul. The story about Matt Millett and John Thorne. Matt is the Albany historian, knows a lot about a lot of stuff, even about here. John Thorne is Major League Baseball historian. He couldn't be here today. He has a family event that they do every year at this time in Maine. That's understandable. I asked him if he could come down for a couple hours, but he wouldn't. I understand. And one of the people that I really want to thank too is Tim Burek from Century Monument. When I told him of the idea, I'm sorry, I don't get like this. When I told him the idea, we need a monument. And we thought about a lot of things, and he came up with this idea. He designed it. Hats off, Tim. Thank you. Okay, now, everybody, there's going to be other speakers, but I just want to take everybody back in history, okay? 1881, 138 years ago today, okay? Let's take it back another day, September 9th, 1881. The National League Baseball Club from Troy was having a game at their park in Troy, Putnam Field. Now, the owner of the club was very unhappy with attendance. Less than 200 people at the game. They had one more game to play that year. So he got ticked off and he says, I'm moving this game south. So he came south to Bonacker Island. This Riverfront Park was Riverfront Park, Bonacker Island. But does anybody know where we really were? This was East Albany. That's why Matt Millett and John Thorne, I think, had a little bit of a battle. Just a little. Okay, Matt. So they moved the game down here. Last game of the season. I just want to throw you in on a few tidbits of what went on that year. Okay, here we have the National League, the Troy National League Ball Club, which was actually their official name. The media got a hold of it and says, oh, we got to give a name. So they come up with the Trojans. Later on, they were known as the Haymakers, for all of you history buffs. So let's move the game down here. Last game of the season, they have a losing record. They're in 5th place. But that team had 3 Hall of Famers on it. I did not bring my glasses. I didn't think I was going to need the notes. But I can tell you, Buck Ewing was one of them, and of course our Roger Connor. But anyway, the game goes on. Picture the conditions. The home plate was back that way to where the bathroom is, if you know the other side of the park. That's where the actual home plate was. They come in to play this game, knowing it's the last game of the season. Let's do this. They had 2 pitchers on the team. Anybody think that a full pitching staff was 2 pitchers? They had 45 losses that year and 39 wins. These 2 pitchers absorbed all the losses and all the wins. Today, if a guy pitches 5 innings, it's called a good outing. Okay? The game has changed. The conditions. Imagine the field. Nothing like Yankee Stadium or Citi Field or, okay, Fenway Park. But the conditions were much worse. The equipment. Remember those, you see pictures and stuff of those baseball gloves with 3 or 4 fingers? Imagine trying to field with that on a bumpy infield. The average baseball game at that time had 5.5 errors per game. Today, if you make an error, you're chastised. How can you make an error? But that's the way it was. Anyway, we come into the bottom of the 9th inning. The Worcester, for all you Massachusetts people, if there's any, Ruby Legs are leading 7-3 in the bottom of the 9th inning. Now, does anybody know who the president was back then, 1881? It was James Garfield, just so you know. That's part of my research. So we get into the ball game. We're into the bottom of the 9th inning, 7-3 score. Lee Kirkwood, big lefty from the Worcester Ruby Legs, is on the mound. Now, we'll call them the Trojans. They did pile up a bit of a rally. They scored a run. Now it's 7-4. Up comes good old Raj. That was his nickname, good old Raj. He's in his 2nd year of Major League Baseball, and he's already good old Raj. But he hit 2 home runs that year. He led his team with 2 home runs. The whole team hit 5. That's unheard of in today's baseball, as anybody knows. But here we are. Good old Rod steps up to the plate, and he hits a drive to deep right center field. Now, there's no fence, so on they go. He's running the bases. Grand slam home run. Troy wins 8-7. Final game of the year. The next year, they went back to Troy for a year, and then they went to Waterville, which at the time, we were East Albany. Waterville was West Troy. Just a fact for all you history buffs, if there are any, just so you get an idea of what went on. Roger Connor, though. I couldn't stop there. This guy intrigued me. After all, he's a Hall of Famer. You look at his stats, this gentleman hit 138 home runs. 138 home runs. Today is what? The 138th anniversary of that home run. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah? Pretty cool. Anyway, Roger Connor went on to play the Trojans / Haymakers. After 3 years, went on to become, was known as the New York Gothams, who later became the New York Giants. New York Giants played in the Polo Grounds. Anybody know of the Polo Grounds? I'm sure we all remember the Polo Grounds. Well, he hit the first home run out of the ballpark in the Polo Grounds. So Roger made himself quite the name for himself. He had to. When the good Lord takes me, one of the things I want to do is meet this guy. He's incredible. All this research. I tried Ancestry.com. I tried Google this, Google that. I even called Waterbury, Connecticut, and asked, can anybody help me out with Roger Connor? Who? I said, Roger Connor. Please don't tell me you've never heard of him. He's a baseball Hall of Famer. Now, I myself, and I know several other here that are baseball diehards. You can have football, basketball, baseball's the sport. Okay. That aside, didn't know who he was. I said, he's in the Hall of Fame. Well, I don't know what you want me to do. I said, is there someone in Vital Statistics can help me out? They couldn't. So I tried other ways. I contacted Matt Millett. I contacted John Thorne, Paul Grandal. I tried everything. The best I could come up with, I got a social security number, but I don't know if the person's still alive. Caucus, Maryland was the last real connection, but that stopped in 2004, so that all went out the tubes. Anyway, I made a good effort to try and get him here. And by the way, triples aren't what they used to be, because I did research. Roger Connor is still, to this day, the 5th leading triple hitter in Major League Baseball history. He goes with Rogers Hornsby, Ty Cobb, some of these other people. But nobody, I mean, it's become, it is what it is. Now the beefed up balls and everything, the ball flies out of the park. Triples aren't what they used to be. But he's still 5th, and you consider 138 years. And by the way, he did hold the home run crown. He was the Babe Ruth of Babe Ruths until 1921, when a guy named Babe Ruth hit his 139th. And then he hit a couple more after that. But Roger Connor set the standard, and I'm so honored to be able to, and again, when I brought this up to the other council members, they said run with it. I ran with it, and I'm so glad I did, and this is what it's all come down to. And thank you all very much for coming, and God bless Roger Connor.
Thank you, Brian. That was an amazing story. You are a great storyteller. I'd like to introduce Matt Millett, who actually made this history come alive with his research.
I promise I won't cry like Brian. First, I want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you to Councilman Leahy and Mayor Mooney for making this monument happen. So with that, here we go. As an Albany historian, I'm generally in the business of highlighting and rediscovering the city of Albany's past. So it was a little weird to work this hard to have something taken away from it. My apologies to the mother city across the river. 3.5 years ago, I had just finished one of my first history segments for Spectrum News. It was a long piece on Abraham Lincoln's historic visit to Albany with former Assemblyman Jack McEnany. It was very in-depth and highly exhausting. So we wanted something pretty easy for our next one. My producer at the time was looking for something baseball related since opening day was coming up. And this area, as we now know, has some very early Major League Baseball roots. Case in point, the Troy Trojans. As I started doing my research, I stumbled upon Roger Connor's home run, grand slam I should say, at Riverside Park in Albany. This sounded pretty open and shut and checked off the fairly easy box on my list of things to do for the day. Albany's Riverside Park is now buried beneath 787, but just to be sure the facts were indeed the facts, I gave Albany City historian Tony Alpaca a call. He seemed surprised by the information, but Tony isn't what you would call a huge sports nut. So that wasn't really surprising. I still remember his reply, I had no idea. Riverside Park wasn't very big since it was a pocket park. I didn't think they even had a baseball field. And then he drops the knowledge bomb and says it wasn't actually built until 1903, 22 years after that home run. So I said, well, what does that mean? He goes, it sounds like you got the wrong Riverside Park. And I replied, oh darn. But I didn't say darn. It was something much more foul. That nice, easy, open and shut history segment had just gotten complicated. Over the next month, I scoured old newspapers and maps looking for the correct Riverside Park. It turns out the name Riverside Park was quite popular in the 19th century. Almost every city had one. But after a lot of cross-referencing, the only one it could have been was right here. We were able to get the segment on the air back in 2016. We had more than enough information to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was the spot, but we never had an image of the park, and we never had any sort of, aha, this is it, this is the spot evidence. Over the last 3 years, I had put the research down and I'd come back to it, put it down and come back to it. Eventually, this past spring, Paul Grondel wrote a newspaper article on it, and this whole thing caught fire again. Within a couple of days of the story running in the Times-Union, it found its way to Major League Baseball historian John Thorne, who was under the belief that Albany was, in fact, the correct location. And that's where him and I started volleying information on the who's, the what's, and the many possible wheres. In my complete ignorance, I didn't really know much about him other than he was baseball's official historian. My friend Maeve sent me a text that read, whatever you do, don't Google him. Well, I mean, you have to Google him at that point. I mean, you've just been warned, so yeah, you do it. As I'm flipping through his many accomplishments, from the numerous books he'd written to his work with Ken Burns on the heralded PBS documentary Baseball, and oh yeah, proving baseball wasn't actually created by Abner Doubleday, and it wasn't actually from Cooperstown. And in the pit of my stomach, it had actually become a massive black hole. And I thought to myself, I gotta go up against this guy? Oh, dear Lord. Oh, darn. But again, I didn't say darn. None of my evidence placated him. He wanted more. He wanted that surefire piece I didn't have. My problem, and his, was I knew I was right. And I could be pretty stubborn about it. But I'm also a believer in serendipity. On my living room wall, above my shoe tray, is a large lithograph of the city of Albany from 1879. I think it's absolutely beautiful. My wife hates it, but I think it's great. You can see every notable building of the city. It's intricately drawn. As our debate was winding down, and definitely in John's favor, I looked at that print like I do every morning as I bend down to grab my shoes. But this time, just one time, I came face to face with something I had never seen before. The lithograph also has a little bit of Rensselaer at the very edge of the frame. And there it was, a baseball field. It had fences and a grandstand. It was Riverside Park, our first and only known image of that park. That weekend, I parked myself at the New York State Library and was able to track down the original newspaper article. It was some of the most glorious black and white I had ever seen. The article started with, "Across the river from Albany in Riverside Park on Saturday." The mystery was officially solved with that one line. Needless to say, John was absolutely thrilled. He was over the moon that the evidence was finally to his liking. And thank God, so was I. I don't know how much longer I could deal with John Thorne just crowing back at me. Baseball history was rewritten that day, and I'm just so very glad I was able to be a part of it. Before I wrap up my story, I want to leave you with some fun facts on how hallowed this baseball ground is. We know this is the site of Major League Baseball's first Grand Slam. There's been a lot of them since, literally thousands of them. But this just wasn't just a Grand Slam. It was an ultimate Grand Slam, which can be essentially described as a walk-off Grand Slam down by 3 runs in the last inning of the game. There's only been 29 in history. 29 total. Lee Richmond gave up the first Grand Slam in history. A year earlier in 1880, Richmond himself was making history by pitching the first perfect game in Major League Baseball history. The next ultimate Grand Slam wouldn't come again until 1925 when some lady named Babe Ruth did it in Yankee Stadium. From the newspaper article I dug up, it stipulated that the ball Roger Connor hit went over the outfielder's head and rolled to the fence. Connor not only hit the first Grand Slam and the first ultimate Grand Slam, he hit the first ultimate inside the park Grand Slam. That has only happened one other time in baseball. In 1956, a 21-year-old outfielder named Roberto Clemente was the only other one to do it. Of all the times a player had stepped into a box with the game on the line over the last 150 years, it only happened twice. And you're all standing at that spot on that day at that time. And that is pretty amazing. Soak it in.
I'd like to introduce Paul Grandal from the Times Union, my favorite author and the head of the New York State Writers Institute.
Thank you all for coming. It's my honor to be here. What I do is tell stories, and I always look for great stories, particularly great stories that are uplifting. And that's what you have here in Rensselaer and Roger Connor and what you've heard from Brian and Matt. They told much better than I could about this story, and it's a beautiful thing. It's also a reminder, I think baseball is a metaphor for life. A lot of us have been down 3 runs in the 9th inning on different, experiences. I know the city of Rensselaer has had some tough times, but I feel that you're coming back. I feel that this is a city that's on the move and looking up, and this is a beautiful, emblematic effort of that people came together, saw you have something special, something unique, something national, something nobody else has. And it's really nice here to be part to celebrate that. And I'll put a little coda on it that after John and Thorne and Matt Millette went back and forth, I got yet a second story out of it, and I got a free dinner at Jack's. And I got to listen to these guys who know more about baseball than I'll ever know, talking about telling great baseball stories. And I brought my notebook, a reporter's always working. I'll get a third story out of it, so maybe you'll read about this next week. And if anyone wants to talk to me, has an interesting story of this park or the city, come see me. But thank you very much. Congratulations, Rensselaer. Thank you.
Last but not least, I'd like to introduce the president of the Tri-City Valley Cats, Rick Murphy.
Wow, what a day. It's a pleasure to represent the Valley Cats and an honor to be here on this ceremonial day. The Valley Cats are just, we just completed our 18th season at the Joe. We've sent 68 ball players to the major leagues. We're honored to carry the torch for baseball in the Capital Region. We could have used a few Roger Connors this year. We struggled a little bit in the end. But what we want to do is create memories, and we're just ecstatic to be invited here today, and this is to be a memorable event. Thank you, Brian.
All right, I'd like to ask all of our elected officials and dignitaries to come up, and we'll unveil the plaque. Thank you.
It's almost like